The Ramchal writes something very interesting. King David says and tells us in Psalms that the lifespan of man is 70 years. But if one should live longer, 80 years is considered advanced age. A man, a person, man or woman lives 70, 80 years and lives a proper life, lives within the context as God had prescribed one should live. And one had spiritualized and elevated himself. 80 years, 70 years, one merits eternity. It's a level of kindness where a person invests something which is considered less than infinitesimal, and the result, the consequence of that, the ramification of that, is eternity. There's a midrash with Moshe, the teacher of the Jewish people. Before he passes away, he says to them, I am presenting before you life and death. You should choose life. Isn't it obvious? If you have an inferno to the left and you have paradise to the right, does a person have to be encouraged to choose paradise over the inferno, where it's immediate death and destruction? But Moshe has to encourage us. Choose life. He's pleading with us. Don't choose death. Why? So the Midrash explains, the Midrash being part of the Talmud, what is it analogous to? A person's traveling on a road and he comes to a crossroads and he doesn't know what direction should he go, to the right or to the left. And there's an old wise man at the crossroads and he knows immediately what's going through the person's mind. If you look to the right, as far as the eye could see, the road is fraught with all kinds of problems. The road is broken. Predator animals, snakes, vines, shrubbery, which you barely could penetrate. The most ominous looking setting. You look to the left. It's a level of aesthetic beauty, ease, comfort, whatever one would dream for is to the left. So of course, the person naturally is about to gravitate to the left. The old man, wise man, knows exactly what's going through this person's mind. Living many years and traversing many of these roads, he says to this young person, don't make a lifetime mistake, because I want to explain you something. Although to the right, as far as your eye could see, it looks ominous and treacherous, but that's only a 3-day travel. After you travel those 3 days, you're going to come upon a level of beauty and comfort and pleasure and aesthetics and horizons that you can't even fathom what they are. And the ease and the pleasantness and the elation and the invigoration that you can have from that. There's nothing comparable in existence to that. You've never been exposed to that. And to the left, although as far as your eye could see, you only see beauty and a pleasurable situation, beyond that 3-day trek, You're going to come upon pain and suffering and the most terrible experiences that you can't even imagine what they are forever. And you'll never be able to extricate yourself from them. I advise you, it pays to take the road to the right, although it's difficult initially, but ultimately, what you're going to reap and what you're going to have, you'll thank me forever. To the left, you'll curse the day that you began that trek beyond 3 days. Moshe says to the Jewish people, Moshe Rabbeinu, Moshe our teacher, this world, 70 years, 80 years, is no more than 3 days compared to eternity. If one succeeds in this life and utilizes this life as a medium to make proper choices, the result is spiritual bliss, eternity, where there's nothing comparable to what that is. But short term, if you should take the left road, which is totally immersing yourself in physicality, hedonism, or only material for the sake of material, not using it as a medium to facilitate the spiritual, what the person has given up, has forfeited the opportunity to use it for something which is magnificent, which is an understatement, unlimited, infinite. Just the pain of being denied that, besides the suffering which one causes himself for doing the wrong thing, the person will regret it forever. Therefore, Moshe says, don't be short-sighted by just evaluating life based on the most superficial level of superficiality, but rather understand the value of the investment and the initiative, because what you will reap is something which is nothing comparable to those fruits. I'd mentioned the name of the Rabbi Bachya, who was a student of Nachmanides. He writes in the introduction of the portion of Genesis that the human being created, the last of creation, is an indication that he is the center of the universe. He's the primary creation. And everything that preceded him was only to accommodate his existence, and it's for him to utilize to address his objective, which is the service of God. And therefore, God had everything in place, and then he brings the human being on scene to become fully functional with existence. There's a question which is asked: where does the human being have a right to kill the animal for its meat, for its hide, for his own benefit? Why is that considered taking a life for a life? Although before the Great Flood, humanity was not permitted to kill for food consumption. You have no right to take that life. To bring the animal as a sacrifice to God, that was permitted. Adam was the first human being to bring a sacrifice, because this is God's world. That is no question. However, to kill an animal for the sake of the human being, this is not permitted. Only after the Great Flood was it permitted. God had said that the animal is like the vegetation of the field. As the vegetation of the field is permitted to you, the animal is permitted to you for consumption. The human being, as we mentioned, is more than an intellectual animal. The human being has a godliness within him, has the ability to spiritualize the physicality of himself and of the world through his actions. The animal, whatever it is, it was created to be. And its behavior and function is purely instinctive. Rabbi Yochanan, who was the author of the Jerusalem Talmud, who was one of the greatest interpreters of the Mishnah, which is the codification of the oral law, writes that a person should sell all his belongings to buy a pair of leather shoes. It's very important to have a pair of leather shoes. The question is why? And whenever the Torah speaks about shoes, it's always something that covers the foot that's made of leather. If it's made of any other material, it does not assume the status of a shoe. Although it's shaped and the comfort is no less than a shoe, but it's not a shoe. For instance, there are 5 areas of deprivation on Yom Kippur, which is the 10th day of Tishrei. It's the Day of Atonement. A Jew is not permitted to engage in eating, drinking, anointing oneself, washing oneself, cohabitation, and wearing shoes. The prohibition of shoes is specifically a leather shoe. If it's made of natural fiber, man-made fiber, it's permitted to wear. So Rabbi Yochanan says you should sell all your belongings. If you have to purchase a pair of leather shoes, you should. The question, why is it so important? There's a law in the Torah that if a man dies childless and there's a surviving brother, there's a positive commandment which is known as levirate marriage, that the surviving brother should marry the widow of his brother to perpetuate the name of the deceased. This is a positive commandment. Under normal circumstances, the wife of a brother, even after she's divorced, or if he had children, is considered an incestuous relationship. But if the brother died childless, not only is it not considered incestuous, there's a positive commandment for the surviving brother to perform levirate marriage. What happens if the brother chooses not to perform this positive commandment? The widow is not permitted to remarry until she receives a release. This release, within the context of definitive law, Jewish law, the process is called chalitza, the removal of the shoe. That the widow removes a leather shoe from the right foot of the brother-in-law, of the surviving brother, who does not want to perform levirate marriage to perpetuate the name of the deceased, and she spits in his presence and makes a declaration in front of the rabbinic court. This man refuses to perform levirate marriage, and then the court responds, this woman has received a release as a result of the removal of the shoe. What is the symbolism of the removal of the shoe, the leather shoe, off the foot of the surviving brother, the brother-in-law, because he does not want to perform the positive commandment of levirate marriage? So there is a commentator on the Torah by the name of Malbim, who writes that the leather hide represents the animal. It's symbolic of everything that's physical. If a person takes the hide of the animal and uses it to make a shoe, the human being is treading on the animal. Where do you have a right to tread on the animal? If you're an intellectual animal and the animal is of lesser intellect, you're both within the same classification. So what does wearing the shoe display and declare? I am not an intellectual animal, but rather I'm a spiritual being where the objective of my life is take the control and make choices as a human being to reflect God's will. So wearing that leather shoe is a statement. I trample on the animal, and I have a right to trample on the animal because the animal is only created to facilitate and accommodate all man's needs. That's why Rabbi Yochanan writes, one should sell all that he has if he does not have a pair of leather shoes to wear the shoe, because that's a statement to quantify who the human being is, that he's not merely an intellectual animal. Under normal circumstances, a brother-in-law is not permitted to marry a sister-in-law. It's considered incestuous. If a child should be born of this union, normally the child's considered illegitimate. God says, for the sake of perpetuating the name of the deceased, not only is it permitted, it becomes obligatory. The child will not be illegitimate. The child will be born in this union as a kosher Jewish child. God is willing to turn the world over for the sake of perpetuating the name of the deceased. And yet the brother-in-law says, I have no interest. She's not my cup of tea, as they would say. I have no interest. The Torah says, she takes the leather shoe off his foot. Why? It's so obvious of what the importance of this act is, levirate marriage. But yet this man, he turns a blind eye on the will of God and says, I'm not interested. You're no better than the intellectual animal. Remove the shoe. Remove that leather shoe from his foot, which symbolically, you don't deserve to be classified as the human being, where the world was created only to facilitate your spiritual objective. And she spits in his presence in disgust, expressing God's displeasure with this individual not willing to fulfill the commandment as God had wished.